Hey folks, I am Jay. Welcome to Homemade Heroes. Today we're going to be doing something a little different as we recently played Cairn for the first time. I GM'd and I had 3 players join me. And so I wanted to run you through that, not so much as a review of Cairn as a TTRPG system, but more so just sharing our experiences and how much we enjoyed the game. Because one, it was really easy to set up and run, and two, my players had a blast. So let's jump in and chat about how things went. So, for those of you that don't know, Cairn is a really simple TTRPG system. The entire first edition booklet is 20 pages, it's free, and it is easy to run and fun to play. So, just to give you a sense of what I was doing with Cairn, and again, this is the first time that I've ever run it and the first time any of my players have ever played it. But we set up a 3-hour game session. We did character creation at the table, and that took about 30 to 40 minutes. And then we played a one shot. Now the one shot actually came from Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, a 5 ebook, but I adapted it to Cairn. And that was super simple. There were really no issues. It was also set in a homebrew setting, so something that I've created. I haven't put a lot of work into that setting, but it's something that sparked my imagination and I just really wanted to try it out. And so there were a few additional rules, shall we say, or a few additional features that are not part of Cairn or part of D&D 5e. And maybe I'll get into that in a little bit. Along with using the adventure from the Journeys from the Radiant Citadel, I also had a few other props that I used in the game to make it a bit more immersive. So one of those were these tokens that I created out of Lego. I also used a Paizo flip mat. So that is a mat that is made for dry or wet erase markers. I had a handful of markers with me that I used to draw out basic maps and also for combat. The Paizo map is gridded, but we were pretty loose on how we measured the distances in combat. As you can see, this is a pretty simple character sheet. I'm not going to run through it in detail, but essentially you have 3 abilities, which you can see there as strength, dexterity, and will. You also have a backpack section, which is where obviously you store your inventory, the things that you carry, and also where you mark off fatigue if you are suffering from fatigue, which takes up a slot. So you could theoretically get to the point in the game where you're having to dump items because you're accumulating fatigue. The other really cool thing about the character sheet here is that it actually, on the reverse side, has a rules, kind of a rules summary, a simplified rule set. And so that's super useful for your players because they have their character sheet in front of them, and then they can flip it over and check out some of the rules if they're unsure about something. Here is a look at the rule summary from the backside of the character sheet. It is a great little summary to have for your players and also for the GM. I use this along with the actual booklet to help guide me, and it was definitely useful. It has some key things there about like use of the inventory, about combat, and also about actions. Let's talk about character creation. This was hilarious, and I highly recommend doing this at your table. One of the interesting things about this was that there was this interesting interplay between rolling and creativity by the players as they were rolling at times and then looking at the results they got. They would look at their name, their background, and some of their character traits, and then they would decide that maybe some didn't fit. So one of the players, she changed her character name because she didn't like the way that it fitted with the character as it evolved through the rolling. Another player, he was rolling 2 dice, and he would look at both results and then take the one that he preferred. So there was, even amongst our table of 3 players, some variation on how they were creating their character. But there was also a lot of strange combinations and things that I think players wouldn't usually put together when they're creating a character. A lot of the time there were these features that didn't really fit together all that well, but created a really unique character. And this was a real point of laughter and connection between the players. As they were going through this process, they were also developing how their characters knew each other. So there were some fun and funny connections that developed as this was all going on. Here's the page that shows the names and backgrounds of the players. And one thing that got a little confusing was that all three of my players rolled names, first names, that started with G. So at one point, I think we got about a third into the game, maybe about half an hour, 45 minutes. And it was really difficult for me to remember folks' names because they all started with G. Two of the names sounded almost the same. There was a Grua and a Gruid, and then the third G name. So one of them changed their name, and it made it much easier for me. So just one of those things when you're rolling, you never know what's gonna come up. So here are the character traits, and there are some really interesting ones here. So you're gonna end up, or your player is gonna end up with really interesting characters. I've played a little bit of Cairn just myself, solo playing, and I definitely had some odd combinations of traits and characteristics. But it all adds to the game, and I think really helps to make more unique characters. So we're going to take a quick look at the rules page, and the only thing I really want to focus on here is the abilities. We have three abilities. We have strength, dexterity, and will. Those three abilities are connected to saves, which are one of the main mechanics of the game. So when there is a situation where an outcome is in doubt, or the characters have to perform some kind of action where they may or may not succeed, that's where we would use the saves. With only three, it makes it really simple. I did find though that because I'm used to 5e, there were certain things where I had to think about how to like do those things in Cairn. So for example, perception checks. There's no perception check, there's no perception skill, wisdom is not even an ability. So in terms of what the players see, and taking from the guidelines, the philosophies of Cairn, I would describe as much as possible based on what I think their characters would be able to see in that situation. So for example, when the characters moved into a cottage to investigate it, I told them what the room looked like, the basic layout, where things were, and then I mentioned that there were some books from a bookshelf that were scattered on the floor, and asked them if they wanted to go and take a look at those more closely. They said yes, so then I gave them more details about those books. Another situation where I would have used, say, some sort of skill check in 5e was intelligence-based things, because there's no ability related to intelligence as such. And so, if characters wanted to know, or if I wanted to know if characters knew anything like Arcana related or history related, then that was a little difficult. For me, I tended to ask about their background to see if their background could connect to having any knowledge of that sort, and then just sort of adjust what I gave them based on that. But really, Cairn wants you to give as much information as possible in my reading of it. However, there are certain things that some characters just wouldn't know, and so it's okay to potentially hold things back in that situation. I found combat really simple with Cairn, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the monsters in a moment, but we didn't use an initiative order as such. Combat is really simple. Everything hits, so whether it's a spell or whether it's an attack with a ranged weapon or a melee weapon, everything hits, and essentially you take whatever you roll. So let's say you roll a d6 and you get a 6, and the opponent that you're facing has an armor of 3, then you take 3 off that 6, which leaves you with 3, and then you take that remaining 3 from the attack roll, and you take that off their HP. So if they had 4 HP, they would go down to 1 HP. And HP is a little different to in 5e. Well, quite different actually. We won't get into that here. Maybe we'll save that for another video. Not having a formal initiative system, what I did was I had the players roll a dexterity save if I thought that there was some doubt as to whether the monsters or the players would go next. So, for example, at the start of the adventure, or close to the start of the adventure, the group gets attacked by these villagers that have been enthralled by some evil presence. So the players rolled dexterity saves for their characters. Two of them succeeded, and so they got to go first, and then the monsters went, and then the third character, she went last. And I did find that like combat was really quick. Maybe it's because the characters are more like first characters in some senses in terms of their HP. They're a little bit squishy, but they and the monsters that they were facing in this particular counter were also had low HP, and so things went really fast, and the combat probably only lasted maybe 10 or 15 minutes, which if you're comparing it to 5e, that's quite a difference, because often combat encounters in 5e take upwards of 30 minutes, and the bigger and more complicated the combat, the more time it takes. Scars are a really interesting feature of Cairn, and how this works is if a character gets reduced to exactly 0 HP, they will incur this scar, and the scar has two elements. The first element is the scar itself. It could be a physical scar or a mental or emotional scar. It doesn't affect the character mechanically, but it certainly offers opportunity for role playing. And the second part of the scar is a potential mechanical improvement. So, as an example, one of the characters in our recent game, they got taken down to 0 HP, and therefore we're going to have this lasting scar, which is number 1 on the table that you can see. So they rolled to find out where it was, and the scar occurred on their ear. So we built that into like the combat story, and then they rolled their d6 to see if they got a higher HP roll, and if so, they were going to be able to keep that roll. They had 1 HP, and they rolled a 2. So they went from 1 to 2. They doubled their HP. Not super significant, but it was actually really helpful later on in the game. So this is really fun because the scars give you something interesting about your character that can go forward in the game and can provide role-playing opportunities, but also potentially gives a mechanical advantage. And this really helps out, as it did with this particular character. The last section we're going to talk about is monsters. I didn't use the pre-created monsters here, but I did use the monster creation guide to help me adapt the 3 monsters that were from the Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel one-shot. There were villages that were enthralled by an evil presence. There were the creeping claws, which were essentially amputated hands that would creep around and attack the players. And then finally there was the Soul Shaker, which was essentially an amalgamation of amputated limbs that had become animated. So essentially I just took their stat blocks from 5e, and then I replaced their hit points for HP based on the how difficult or how dangerous that particular monster was. I gave them armor if it made sense, and I gave them like a weapon die based on what sort of damage they would do in their 5e stat block. So that was a really easy way to create monsters that worked in Cairn, but I didn't have to create from scratch. I'm sure some of you GMs out there would just want to create your own monsters, and the Cairn guide makes that pretty easy. But it's also really easy to just modify something from another system, and probably doesn't matter whether that's 5e or some other kind of TTRPG system. It does make it pretty simple. That's it, folks. Hopefully this has been an interesting look into my experience with Cairn, and I'm definitely interested in running more Cairn sessions. I don't know if Cairn would be a good system for a longer campaign. It probably would. I don't know if I would use it myself. I am wanting to use it though for another one shot, and also potentially for some shorter adventures, say like 3 to 4, maybe even up to 10 sessions. And I would need to work with the players to help to grow and develop their characters. Thanks for watching today. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Please leave a comment, ask a question, and if you want to, like and subscribe. Thanks, folks.